They called it an immersive social dynamics game. I call it a cage. Welcome to Wildwood Executive Retreat, a place where the price of leadership is far higher than the corporate expense account. My name is Rowan Mercer, a former ethics student seeking refuge, but I found myself forced into a real-life game of Werewolf, bound by 3 strange rules just to survive the night. What's the creepiest game you've ever been forced to play? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to join the retreat, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because in this game, the monsters aren't always hidden. The assessment begins. True monsters, I've come to believe, aren't the stuff of gothic novels or late-night creature features. They're cultivated quietly in the fertile soil of human desperation, watered by eroded ethics and the silent surrender of will. I should know the academic scandal at Blackwood University, the one that had my name plastered across ethics review boards, and subsequently incinerated my doctoral ambitions in moral philosophy, hadn't been my doing. I was a scapegoat, a convenient sacrifice on the altar of institutional reputation. But the fallout had left me adrift, disillusioned, questioning the very foundations of the principles I'd once so fervently championed. That's how I found myself stepping off a charter bus into the unnerving, profound silence of the Wildwood Executive Retreat. A sprawling, rustic lodge nestled deep within a forgotten valley of the Colorado Rockies. 12 of us, a carefully selected diverse group of professionals, had been lured here by a handsome stipend and the promise of participating in a cutting-edge, immersive social dynamics game designed to test leadership and team-building skills under pressure, or so the glossy brochure had claimed. The lodge itself was a masterpiece of rugged, isolated charm. Massive timber beams, roaring stone fireplaces, panoramic windows overlooking a vast, ancient forest that seemed to press in on all sides, swallowing sound, light, and perhaps sanity. The air was crisp, smelling of pine, damp earth, and something else, something faintly metallic and unsettlingly feral, like a freshly killed animal hidden just out of sight. On my first morning, after a night of thin, uneasy sleep, punctuated by the distant, mournfully close howl of what I desperately tried to convince myself was just a coyote, I found it, a small, plain white card, typed with an old-fashioned, slightly uneven ribbon, resting on my antique bedside table. There was no greeting, no explanation, just one sentence. Rule 1. Count the players every morning. If there's one extra, and there often is, don't ask who they are or where they came from. Simply acknowledge their presence and continue as normal. Breakfast was a tense, strangely formal affair in the grand vaulted dining hall. 12 of us, as per the official participant list. I counted twice. Then a 13th person materialized at the long oak table, settling into a previously empty chair as if they'd been there all along. Nondescript. Quiet. Male? Female? I couldn't quite tell. They ate little, spoke nothing, and no one else seemed to register their sudden appearance. I remembered the rule, a cold knot tightening in my stomach, and forced myself to look away, to engage in the stilted introductory pleasantries. By the time coffee was served, the 13th chair was empty again, the plate untouched. No one mentioned them. Our game master, a disembodied, unnervingly calm, and gender-neutral voice that emanated from hidden speakers throughout the lodge, laid out the basic structure after that unsettling first meal. Daily challenges, designed to test our problem-solving and collaborative skills. Nightly elimination rounds, where one participant, deemed by group consensus during a daytime assessment phase to be detrimental to team cohesion, would be removed. The ultimate goal, to be the last team member standing. It sounded like a corporate psychology experiment gone slightly Lord of the Flies. The game master's voice, smooth and devoid of any discernible emotion, then delivered the second rule. its chilling detachment sending a fresh wave of unease through the already tense room. Never vote to eliminate anyone during the day. Phase assessment, unless you are absolutely, unequivocally certain of their detrimental impact. The pack always remembers who speaks out against them, especially when they speak in error or with malice. Zuch. Misjudgments often have unforeseen consequences. I met Eden Rowe during the first icebreaker exercise, a pointless, awkward scavenger hunt in the immediate vicinity of the lodge. She was striking, with an intelligent, watchful stillness about her, her eyes a cool, analytical gray. She moved with a quiet confidence, rarely speaking unless spoken to, her observations always sharp, incisive. She seemed, apart from the forced bonhomie and rising anxiety of the others. Later that day, the Game Master's voice announced the first night phase elimination. Mark Jessup, a loud, abrasive sales executive who had spent most of the previous day loudly complaining about the quality of the instant coffee and the remoteness of the location, was simply gone. No dramatic announcement, no explanation. His room, when a few of the braver participants dared to check, was empty, his suitcase still packed, his bed neatly made, as if he'd never been there at all. The Game Master, when questioned via the intercom system, merely stated, participant Jessup's contribution to the team dynamic was assessed as complete. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, filled with unspoken fears. The game had begun, and it already felt less like a test of team building, and more like something else entirely. The disappearance of Mark Jessup, as clinical and uncommented upon as a software update, sent a ripple of genuine fear through our curated little collective. The carefully constructed facade of a social dynamics game was already beginning to crack, revealing something uglier, more primal, beneath. Paranoia, that insidious little microbe, began to spread. Sideways glances, hushed whispers in shadowed corners. The forced smiles became brittle, the laughter strained. Theo Briggs, a beefy, aggressive man who'd introduced himself as a risk management consultant, a euphemism I suspected, for something far less savory, became the self-appointed inquisitor. He was loud, accusatory, his fear manifesting as a belligerent need to find a scapegoat, a target for the group's burgeoning anxiety. Someone's messing with us, he'd bellowed during our second morning's awkward breakfast, where, once again, a silent, unnoticed 13th individual had briefly occupied a chair before vanishing like smoke. This isn't a game. Jessup didn't just leave. One of us is a plant, a saboteur. His gaze swept the room, lingering on the quieter members, the ones who didn't meet his challenging stare. Rowan Mercer, I noted with a fresh wave of unease, remained silent throughout Briggs' tirade, his eyes downcast, observing us all from beneath lowered lids. Eden Rowe, too, was an island of unnerving calm, her expression thoughtful, almost analytical, as if she were observing a particularly interesting petri dish of human behavior. Rule number 2, never vote during the day. Face unless you are absolutely certain. The pack remembers, pulsed in my mind like a dull, throbbing headache. Lair Crown, a mousy, meticulous young woman who introduced herself as a freelance data analyst, and who always seemed to be scribbling furiously in a small, leather-bound notebook, became increasingly agitated by the extra player phenomenon. It's not random, Rowan, she'd whispered to me later that day, her eyes wide, her notes filled with complex tallies and observations. The count. When they're here, the total number of people at the table, it's always a prime number. 13 this morning, 11 yesterday after Jessup left. It's a sequence. It means something. She was trying to impose logic on the illogical, a pursuit I understood all too well. Theo Briggs, however, was having none of it. Fueled by the Game Master's continued, chilling silence regarding Jessup's fate, he forced the issue. He demanded a daytime assessment vote. We need to flush out the weak link. He roared, the one who's not a team player, the one who's working against us. His accusations, wild and unfocused at first, eventually settled on Sarah Bell, a quiet, nervous graphic designer who had the misfortune of bursting into tears under the pressure of his interrogation. Despite the Game Master's earlier warning, despite Rule 2, the group, desperate for a target, for a semblance of control, succumbed. Sarah was voted out, her protests, her terrified sobs, ignored. The Game Master's voice, when it finally came over the intercom later that afternoon, was as smooth and devoid of emotion as ever. Participant Bell's role in this dynamic has concluded. The assessment phase is now complete for today. That night, the howls from the surrounding forests were closer, more numerous, and possessed a distinctly, terrifyingly predatory edge. And then, a new, even more disturbing development began. The food, the meticulously prepared, if somewhat bland, meals provided by the lodge's unseen kitchen staff suddenly started to taste wrong. Not spoiled, but unappetizing. Flat, like cardboard. I noticed others pushing their food around their plates, their appetites inexplicably gone. And then, the dreams started. Vivid, disturbing dreams. Not just for me, but, as hushed, fearful morning conversations revealed, for several others as well. Dreams of running through the moonlit forest, the scent of pine and blood thick in the air. Dreams of an exhilarating, almost unbearable hunger. Dreams of tearing into raw, warm flesh. Rule number 3, the one I hadn't yet found on any typewritten card, the one the Game Master hadn't yet deigned to reveal, was beginning to make its insidious presence known. When you start craving raw meat, the hunger chose you. The next morning, Leah Crown was gone. Her chair at the breakfast table was empty. Her meticulously kept notebook, however, lay open beside her untouched plate. The last entry scrawled in a shaky, almost illegible hand. The count is wrong again. 10. Not prime. Something is missing. Or something new has been added. He needs a full table to choose from. The hunger, it's not a symptom, it's an invitation. Leah Crown's vacant chair, her chilling final entry, cast a pall of genuine, undeniable terror over the remaining participants. 10 of us now. The game, if it had ever been just a game, had shed its pretense. This was about survival, and something was methodically, patiently winnowing our numbers. Theo Briggs, his face a mottled purple of fear and impotent rage after Leah's disappearance, became even more unbearable. Why, his accusations grew wilder, his demands for action more frantic. He now targeted Victor Hale, the 50-something corporate executive who had initially, and somewhat reluctantly, taken on the role of our de facto team leader. You were supposed to keep us safe, Hale, Briggs bellowed across the breakfast table, his voice cracking. You're in charge. What the hell is going on here? Who are you protecting, Hala? A man whose urbane confidence had been steadily eroding with each fresh horror could only stare back, his eyes hollow, his hand visibly trembling as he tried to lift his coffee cup. My own senses were undergoing a disturbing transformation. The world seemed sharper, more intensely defined, and the smells. I could smell the fear coiling off Briggs like a rank animal musk. I could smell the stale coffee on Hale's breath from across the room. And then, during one of the Game Master's pointless team-building exercises, constructing a rudimentary shelter in the woods using only materials we could scavenge, I smelled it. Blood. bright, coppery, alluring. Amelia Chen, a quiet architect, had scraped her hand on a piece of rough bark. It was a minor cut, barely a scratch, but the scent of those few crimson drops, welling on her skin from 20 feet away, hit me with the force of a physical blow, making my mouth water, making my stomach clench with a sudden, shocking, and utterly alien hunger. I found myself staring at the pulse beating softly in her throat, a predatory focus narrowing my vision, an urge so primal, so wrong it terrified me. I looked at Eden Rowe. She was watching me, her cool gray eyes missing nothing. There was no surprise in her gaze, no judgment, only a detached, almost clinical interest, as if she had been expecting this, as if she knew. The Game Master's disembodied voice announced another night phase elimination with its usual chilling neutrality. This time, Theo Briggs, after his public, vicious, and ultimately baseless accusation against a terrified young intern named David Kim during a particularly fraught afternoon assessment session, a clear, desperate violation of rule number 2. His fate had been sealed. His fate had been sealed. David Kim was still with us, shaken but alive. Theo Briggs was simply gone. His room, when a few of us dared to check, was undisturbed, save for the faint, lingering scent of his fear, and something else. That same, faint, metallic, feral odor I'd noticed in the woods. It was Eden who found his backpack, tucked away behind a loose stone in the massive fireplace in the main lodge. She presented it to the group with that same unnerving calm. Perhaps Mr. Briggs left us a souvenir, she'd murmured, her voice soft, almost indifferent. Inside, amidst his spare clothes and a dog-eared copy of The Art of War, was a small oilskin pouch. It was heavy. With trembling hands, Rowan Mercer. I opened it. My stomach heaved. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a clue. It was a collection of small, disturbingly gnawed bones. Animal bones, mostly. Squirrels, rabbits. But nestled amongst them, unmistakably, horrifyingly, was a single, delicate human finger bone, picked clean, with what looked like human teeth marks. Theo Briggs hadn't just been eliminated. He had been consumed. Or he had become a consumer. The discovery of the gnawed bones in Theo Briggs' backpack shattered the last vestiges of denial for most of the remaining group. We were not participants in a social experiment. We were cattle in a very exclusive, very specialized abattoir. Victor Hale, our nominal leader, disintegrated before our eyes. His attempts at maintaining order, at projecting an aura of corporate competence, crumbled. He started muttering to himself, his eyes darting, his hands constantly fidgeting. He complained of an unquenchable thirst that no amount of water could satisfy, and an equally unbearable hunger that the lodge now almost universally rejected food could not touch. He swore he heard scratching sounds at his locked bedroom door at night, the rasp of claws on wood. My own cravings were becoming an agony. The scent of blood, once a distant intellectual concept in my ethics studies, was now a constant, maddening siren song. I found myself staring at the other survivors, not as colleagues, not as fellow victims, but as potential sustenance. The pulse beating in Amelia Chen's throat, the soft curve of David Kim's forearm, the way old Mr. Abernathy, a retired librarian, wheezed with each breath, his flesh seeming soft, yielding. These thoughts, these predatory assessments, were horrifyingly, undeniably my own. I fought them, recoiling in self-disgust, but the hunger, deep and primal, was a relentless, gnawing counterpoint to my fraying reason. The Game Master, if it even was a single entity, knew. Rule 3 was tightening its grip. The hunger chose you. Eden Rowe, throughout all this, remained an enigma of calm observation. She watched my internal struggle, her cool gray eyes holding a flicker of something I couldn't decipher. Pity? Contempt? Or perhaps a kind of detached academic fascination. One evening, as I sat alone by the cold fireplace, trying to read, trying to ignore the gnawing emptiness in my stomach, she approached me, moving with her usual silent grace. Hunger can be a powerful clarifier, wouldn't you agree, Rowan? She'd murmured, her voice soft, almost hypnotic. It strips away the extraneous, reduces things to their essential truths. She paused, her gaze intense. What is your essential truth, Rowan? When the veneer of civilization is gnawed away. The game master's voice that evening announced a new challenge. Not a team-building exercise, not a puzzle. A Zustanos acquisition protocol. It had intoned, its voice chillingly devoid of inflection. Participants will proceed individually into the designated forest perimeter. Resources are available for those with the will to procure them. Failure to acquire adequate sustenance will result in metabolic reassessment. It was a test, a hunt. And we were, I suspected, both the hunters and the hunted. The forest was a place of deepening shadows and unnerving watchful silences. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, pine, and that underlying feral tang, stronger now, more acrid urine. I was alone, armed only with a cheap compass and a growing, terrible certainty. The hunger was a living thing within me, clawing, demanding. I stumbled through the undergrowth, my senses preternaturally sharp. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves amplified. And then I saw Victor Hale. He was crouched over something small and furry. A rabbit, perhaps, his movements jerky, animalistic. He wasn't using a knife. He was tearing at it with his teeth, his face contorted in a mask of primal, desperate need, snarling, guttural sounds ripping from his throat. He looked up as I approached, his eyes no longer human, but wild, bloodshot pupils dilated to black pools. He lunged, not at me, but at David Kim, the young intern, who had stumbled out of the trees, pale and terrified. "Food!" Hale shrieked, his voice a raw, broken travesty of human speech. He clawed at David, trying to bite his arm, his neck. David screamed, a high, thin sound of pure terror. Before Halo could do irreparable damage, before any of us could react further, something moved in the shadows, too fast to see. A blur of darkness and impossible speed. There was a sickening, wet tearing sound, and Victor Hale was simply gone, dragged into the undergrowth with a final, choked scream. His last comprehensible words, gurgled out between sobs and feral snarls, echoed in the sudden, horrified silence. Didn't want to. The hunger, it chose me. I just wanted to be safe. The forest floor where he had stood was dark with warm, fresh, glistening blood. Krazaroth, or its harbinger, had claimed its first clear, undeniable victim of Rule 3, and the hunger within me, a cold, hollow echo of Hale's own, intensified, a screaming void, demanding to be filled. Victor Hale's horrific end, his desperate half-human cries swallowed by the indifferent forest, was a brutal, visceral confirmation. The hunger wasn't just a symptom of the game. It was the game. Krazaroth, the devourer in flesh, wasn't just a legend whispered by a frightened cook. It was real, and it was a patient, discerning connoisseur of human desperation, slowly, meticulously, priming its chosen vessel. And I, Rowan Mercer, former ethics student, current unwilling participant in this abattoir of the soul, was undeniably, terrifyingly on its menu. Or perhaps I was meant to be the one setting the table. The days that followed were a descent into a waking nightmare, a landscape of heightened senses and eroding self-control. The world became a symphony of tormenting aromas. The coppery tang of spilled blood from Amelia Chen's now infected scratch. The subtle, warm, living scent of David Kim's fear sweat. The gamey, almost irresistible allure of old Mr. Abernathy's fragile, bird-like pulse beating just beneath his thin, papery skin. My own reflection in the large, dusty windows became that of a stranger. Eyes too bright, unnervingly focused, pupils dilated even in the dim light, a gaunt, predatory tension tightening the skin over my cheekbones. The lodged food was now utterly repellent, ashes and dust in my mouth. Only the thought of raw, warm, yielding flesh could stir even a semblance of appetite. An appetite that now felt less like a need and more like a sacred, irresistible calling. It was Eden Rowe who found me during one of these fugue states. Crouched in the abandoned pantry, my fingers raw from trying to claw open a tin of what I'd irrationally hoped might be raw, preserved meat. She didn't express alarm or pity. She simply watched me, her cool gray eyes holding that familiar, unnerving mixture of detached clinical interest and something else. Something that might have been approval. "You feel it, don't you, Rowan?" she murmured, her voice soft, almost a caress, yet chillingly devoid of genuine warmth. The clarity, the sharpening of perspective, the hunger. "It's not a curse, you know. It's a purification." She knelt beside me, her presence not threatening, but unnervingly intimate. Krazaroth doesn't invade, Rowan. It doesn't possess. It reveals. It strips away the tiresome, self-imposed restraints of your so-called morality, the fragile constructs of your civilized self. It shows you what you truly are, what you truly need. Her words, insane as they were, resonated with a horrifying, seductive logic within the screaming void of my own unnatural cravings. My carefully constructed ethical framework, already battered by the academic scandal that had derailed my life, felt like a rotten, crumbling edifice against the tsunami of this primal, all-consuming need. What are you?" I managed to rasp, my throat dry, my gaze fixed on the pulse beating softly in her own exposed neck. Eden smiled, a faint, almost imperceptible curve of her lips. "I am an observer, Rowan. Student of thresholds. I believe that entities like Krazaroth, the primal forces you might call demonic, are not summoned by arcane incantations or dusty grimoires. They are invited, cultivated. They manifest when the conditions are right. When a closed system like our little retreat here reaches a certain critical point of psychological pressure, when trust erodes, when fear becomes the dominant currency, when the social contract shatters." She gestured vaguely around the decaying lodge. "This isn't just a game, Rowan. It's an incubator, a crucible." Her words, her calm, almost academic detachment, were more terrifying than any overt threat. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't even just a survivor. She was something else, a facilitator, a weaver of this intricate web of despair. You orchestrated this?" I whispered, the full horror of her role dawning. "The rules, the eliminations, the hunger?" "The rules," Eden said, her voice still a soft, reasonable murmur, "are merely parameters, psychological stressors, designed to identify the most receptive candidate. The eliminations, unfortunate perhaps, but necessary to heighten the ambient emotional charge. The hunger." Her eyes seemed to glow faintly in the dim pantry light. "The hunger is Krazaroth's gentle knock, Rowan. its invitation to the feast. It chooses the one whose own suppressed desires, whose own latent capacity for transgression resonates most strongly with its own. I remembered then something I found earlier that day, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in Eden's meticulously neat, almost sterile room. Not a journal filled with fears and anxieties like Leah's, but a series of cold, precise, almost anthropological notes. Psychological profiles of each participant, including myself, detailing our perceived weaknesses, our past traumas, our potential breaking points, and alongside these, hand-drawn schematics of the lodge and the surrounding woods, not escape routes, but flowcharts, diagrams illustrating how to manipulate group dynamics, how to channel fear, how to isolate individuals, how to optimize the environment for what? For Krazaroth's emergence. She hadn't been playing the game. She'd been designing it, calibrating it. You're not its servant, I realized with a fresh wave of revulsion. You're its damn recruitment officer. Eden's smile widened, a chilling, almost predatory baring of teeth. Perhaps I am merely a pragmatist Rowan, a believer in potential. Krazaroth offers a unique form of symbiosis, an evolution. You would still be you. Just more. Stronger. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to an intimate conspiratorial whisper. The others, they are weak, terrified. Their fear is unrefined. But you, Rowan, your struggle, your ethical torment, it makes your potential surrender all the more exquisite. Krazaroth has a discerning palate. She gestured towards the pantry door. Outside, I could hear the panicked, whimpering sobs of David Kim, the young intern, the only other participant, besides myself and Eden, who was, as far as I knew, still alive. The others, Abernathy, Amelia Chen. They had vanished in the preceding days, their disappearances marked only by the Game Master's emotionless announcements of metabolic reassessment. He is terrified, Rowan, Eden murmured, her eyes fixed on mine, holding a chilling invitation. His fear is ripe, a first offering, perhaps, to seal the bond, to embrace your true nature. The choice was there. Stark and terrible, David Kim trembling and broken, a mere arm's length away. And within me, Krazaroth's hunger, a screaming, insatiable void, urging me to yield, to feast, to become. The game wasn't about identifying a monster among us. It was about the meticulous, patient, and utterly depraved cultivation of a monster within one of us. And Eden Rowe, the quiet observer, the weaver of this infernal design, was calmly, rationally, offering me the butcher's apron. The pantry, with its lingering scent of spoiled hope and the faint, coppery tang of old blood, felt like the antechamber to hell itself. David Kim's terrified sobs from beyond the door were a visceral counterpoint to Eden Rowe's calm, persuasive whispers and the gnawing, insatiable inferno of Krazaroth's hunger raging within me. My sharpened senses picked up every nuance of his fear, the frantic lubdub of his heart, the salty tang of his sweat, the warm, irresistible pulse of life. Just beneath his fragile skin, the monster I was becoming, the one Eden had so meticulously cultivated, urged me to tear down the door, to silence his pathetic whimpering with a single, satisfying crimson act. But then, through the red haze of that primal urge, another voice, fainter but more persistent, echoed. My own, the Rowan Mercer who had once believed in moral philosophy, in the inherent worth of a human soul, in the possibility of redemption, even after the bitter sting of betrayal, that Rowan was horrified, sickened by the predatory thoughts now consuming him. No, I managed to rasp the single word, a monumental effort against the tide of hunger. My hands, which had unconsciously clenched into claws, slowly, painfully relaxed. Eden's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. A flicker of disappointment, or perhaps just recalibrated academic interest, crossed her cool gray eyes. "No, Rowan," she murmured, her voice still a silken caress. A rather anachronistic response under the circumstances. The hunger. It doesn't appreciate denial for long. It will have its due, one way or another. This isn't me," I said, more to convince myself than her. I looked at my own hands, at the way they trembled, at the strange predatory alertness in my own reflected gaze from a polished can on the shelf. "This craving, it's a violation, is it?" Eden challenged softly. "Or is it merely the stripping away of artifice, the revealing of the essential, unadorned self? You speak of violation, Rowan, but what about the violation of your own potential? The denial of your own strength? Krazaroth offers power, clarity, an end to the tiresome, endless dithering of the human conscience." I remembered then with a sudden shocking clarity one of the game master's early pronouncements, one of the rules I hadn't found written down, but had been delivered by that disembodied voice. Never vote during the day phase assessment unless you are absolutely, unequivocally certain. The pack always remembers who speaks out against them. Words, votes, accusations. They were the currency of this game. The tools Eden had used to dismantle our fragile social contract. To isolate, to terrify, to prime the chosen host. Speech itself had become a weapon, a trigger for elimination, a pathway to damnation. If words could condemn, then perhaps silence could be a shield. A different kind of defiance, with a surge of desperate, agonizing resolve. I did the only thing I could think of that might break the pattern, that might render me unpalatable, a non-participant in Eden's grotesque social experiment, a failed vessel for Krazaroth's hunger. My eyes fell upon a jagged shard of broken ceramic on the pantry floor, from a dropped plate earlier in the week. My hand, shaking violently, reached for it. Eden watched, her expression unreadable, as I brought the sharp, dirty edge to my own tongue. The pain was searing, an explosion of white-hot agony that momentarily eclipsed even the gnawing hunger. Blood, warm and coppery, filled my mouth, a grotesque parody of the sustenance Krazaroth craved. I bit down hard, not on flesh, but on my own capacity for speech, for accusation, for the verbal participation that this infernal game demanded. I collapsed against the pantry shelves, gasping, the taste of my own blood a bitter, metallic sacrament. I couldn't speak. I couldn't vote. I couldn't accuse. I could only endure. Through the haze of pain, I saw Eden Rowe rise slowly. She looked down at me, her head tilted in that familiar, analytical way. There was no horror on her face, no pity. Only a kind of dispassionate, academic curiosity. Her experiment had yielded an unexpected, perhaps even intriguing, data point. The atypical outlier. "Fascinating, Rowan," she murmured, almost to herself. Self-abnegation as a survival strategy. An attempt to opt out of the dominant resource acquisition paradigm. Highly inefficient from a purely biological standpoint. But the psychological implications. She made a small, precise note in a tiny, leather-bound notebook she produced from a pocket. "Krazaroth will be displeased. It prefers its vessels, articulate in their submission. She gave me one last, lingering look, then turned and walked out of the pantry, her footsteps silent on the creaking floorboards. She didn't try to help me. She didn't try to stop me. She simply observed and recorded. The hunger still gnawed, a dull, aching fire in my belly. But now, it was mingled with a new, sharper pain and a strange, almost liberating silence. I had refused the feast. I had silenced my own capacity to participate in the vote that brought monsters into existence. What that meant for my survival, or for Krazaroth's thwarted appetite, I didn't know. I only knew that in that moment of desperate self-mutilation, I had perhaps reclaimed a tiny bloody shard of the Rowan Mercer I thought had been lost forever. The days, or perhaps weeks, that followed my desperate act in the pantry are a blur of pain, fever, and a silence broken only by the distant, terrified screams of David Kim and the unnervingly calm, periodic announcements from the game masters. Disembodied voice, detailing further metabolic reassessments. I lay there, drifting in and out of a bloody, pain-laced consciousness. The hunger, a dull, constant ache, my self-inflicted wound throbbing, agonizing testament to my refusal. I don't know what happened to David. I don't know what happened to the lodge. My world had shrunk to the four walls of that dusty, blood-stained pantry and the insistent, gnawing emptiness within me. Then, rescue, or at least a version of it. Park rangers, their faces grim and uncomprehending, responding to some long overdue distress signal, or perhaps just a routine check on the isolated property. I was the only one they found alive, emaciated, mute, running a raging fever, but alive. Of Eden Row, of the other participants of the Game Master, there was no sign. Only a derelict, silent lodge, its rooms empty, its tables still set for a meal that would never be eaten. The air thick with the faint, lingering scent of pine, old fear, and something else, something metallic and inexplicably, eternally hungry. The official story was a masterpiece of bland obfuscation. A corporate retreat gone tragically wrong. Hypothermia, malnutrition, possible hallucinogenic contaminants in the local water supply. My inability to speak, my profound psychological trauma, was attributed to the horrors I had supposedly witnessed my colleagues inflict upon each other in a shared psychotic episode. I became a case study in extreme environmental stress, a footnote in some obscure psychological journal. Eden Row, of course, resurfaced unscathed. She was found weeks later, miles from the lodge, claiming to have escaped the group's descent into madness. Her calm, articulate testimony a stark, believable contrast to my own shattered silence. She even expressed professional concern for my well-being. Years passed. The physical wounds healed, though a puckered, ugly scar remained on my tongue, a constant reminder. Speech returned, slowly, haltingly, but the words always felt inadequate, tainted. I lived a quiet, isolated life, haunted by the silence of the wildwood, by the memory of Eden's cool, analytical gaze, by the phantom pangs of a hunger that, though dormant, never truly left me. Then, one rain-swept autumn afternoon, while browsing a university bulletin board, a flyer caught my eye, a prestigious academic symposium. The keynote speaker, Eden Row, PhD. Her topic, the mechanisms of moral collapse and emergent primal hierarchies in closed survival systems, a case study analysis. I attended. I had to. She stood at the podium, poised, articulate, a respected academic, addressing a rapt audience of her peers. Her presentation was brilliant, chillingly detached, filled with complex diagrams of group dynamics, psychological stress vectors, and a theoretical framework for the spontaneous emergence of apex predatory behavior in resource-scarce, ethically compromised environments. And then, her final slide. A complex flowchart illustrating the progression of her case study. XB712, anonymized subjects. Arrows indicating escalating paranoia, trust erosion, anguish at eventual, inevitable triggering of primal survival instincts. And then at the very bottom of the slide, in small, almost invisible print, a chilling final footnote. Note, 12 subjects entered the isolation phase. Spontaneous hierarchical restructuring and resource acquisition strategies observed. 11 subjects achieved primal satiation through emergent interspecies predation and subsequent metabolic assimilation. 1 subject, designated Outlier RM, exhibited a typical non-compliance, choosing self-abnegation over participation in the dominant resource acquisition paradigm. Further research indicated on the psychophysiological impact of atypical outliers in influencing pack cohesion and entity manifestation. Thresholds. Our eyes met across the crowded lecture hall. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Eden Rose's lips. Her experiment, I realized with a sudden, soul-freezing certainty, was far from over. I hadn't been a survivor. I had simply been data, an interesting anomaly in her ongoing, horrifying research into the precise academic methodology of voting monsters into existence. The hunger was still out there, and Eden was still meticulously setting the table. The real horror wasn't Krazaroth. It was the cold, rational human mind that so willingly, so patiently, invited it in. Wildwood holds its secrets and its hunger close. Rowan Mercer learned that some games don't end when the sun rises. The rules were a terrifying blueprint. But the true horror was always the one who designed the game. Krazaroth is real, and its appetite is boundless. Seriously, if you didn't stay until the very end, you missed the ultimate chilling revelation, the twist that changes everything you thought you knew about Wildwood. The final moments will leave you questioning who the real monster is. What do you think Krazaroth is? What was Eden Rose's true role? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you made it out of Wildwood, if the hunger hasn't claimed you, then you're already a part of our story. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules, because some retreats, they're not designed for relaxation. And the final assessment is always waiting.